All right, moving on to story number 2. Here's a question for you again. What has been the worst thing about the seemingly never-ending coronavirus pandemic? Thank you once again, President Xi, for the gift that keeps on giving, as I think Chevy Chase says in Christmas Vacation. No, I think it's the first family vacation movie. That's the gift that keeps on giving. I've never seen that movie all the way through. I don't think it's very funny. Sue me, tell me what a horrible person I am in the comment box below. For my money, I'll always watch something like a real classic like Batman Returns over any of the vacation movies. But to talk seriously, what has been the worst thing about the pandemic? Maybe it's the fact that you haven't been able to see your loved ones, like maybe your grandparents. Maybe it's the fact that you haven't been able to work. Maybe you can't do your job from home. And so you've been out of work, wondering, praying to God how on earth you're going to provide for yourself and your family. Maybe it's the idea that things are never going to go back to normal. Maybe it's the feeling that you have that these mayors and governors are lording over us with their emergency decrees, which don't seem to be following any set sort of science anymore. Did you see, for example, the story that a mutant strain of the coronavirus has arisen in the United Kingdom? But Dr. Anthony Fauci, says that the U.S. shouldn't put a travel ban on Great Britain because those are draconian, and who knows, it might be here already. That mutant strain might already be here. So in other words, governors like Andrew Cuomo, Gavin Newsom, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, mayors like Lori Lightfoot in Chicago, and and others, they can keep, Gretchen Whitmer up in Michigan, the governor of Michigan, they can keep dictating to us what we can and can't do. They can keep telling us, no, you have to close your business here, you have to close your business here. Even when you're following all the rules, they'll arbitrarily change them and then close you down and fine you for breaking the rules. They can keep doing all that out of the excuse of keeping people safe, but they won't actually shut down travel between our country and a country where a mutant strain of the virus has occurred that could even be more contagious and more deadly to people, simply because that's draconian. So, I mean, these are all legitimate concerns. But you know what the real worst thing about this pandemic is? It's prevented us from having frivolous sex. I mean, that's the real bad thing that has happened. And this, unfortunately, is not a gag. No, I am not reading a story from The Onion. I am not reading a story from the Babylon Bee. This story, this opinion piece, is in the paper of repute, supposedly, of America, the New York Times, the gray old lady itself, who apparently stopped taking her meds a long time ago, because this has now reached, gosh, this has almost reached Christopher Walken levels of weirdness. Except where Walken's weirdness is cool, this is just perverted. This is written by a woman named Megan Nolan, and her little blurb reads, Miss Nolan is a writer and a critic. Do tell. She is a columnist for New Statesman, where she writes about culture and politics, oh joy rapture, and the author of the forthcoming novel, Acts of Desperation. I will definitely put that on my non-Christmas list. That is the list I keep to tell people what I do not want. In fact, do not even think about giving me these items, because if you do give me those things, they are going to go into a bonfire where I will dance maniacally around them like an old pagan witch doctor. And the title of her piece, of this opinion piece in the New York Times, The Joys of Frivolous Sex, the pandemic has brought out a nasty puritanism. A nasty puritanism. That is telling. This is what she says. The coronavirus pandemic has brought out a nasty puritanism in some people who luxuriate in the ability to police the way others live. One doesn't even need to actually break a rule to earn their disgust, only to express dismay over things they consider unimportant or worse, hedonistic. Again, with this idea that the Puritans were a bunch of sour, dour, fuddy-duddy, bad grapes who were terrified that someone somewhere was having a good time. No, 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 no. That is a myth. No, that's not a myth. I'm sorry. Myths are actually true. They are truth spoken poetically. That's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's fake news, as President Trump would say. Historical fake news, and even more important and more to the point, it's a lie. It is a damnable lie. And it's a lie done specifically to cover up the fact that the Puritans did a lot of good for the world, and that the Puritans are actually one of the intellectual seeds of what made America what it was and what made America great to begin with. The left doesn't want us to remember that, because then it would put their whole agenda in jeopardy. Now, let's just talk. Let's just pause right there for a second and ponder what she says. The coronavirus pandemic has brought out a nasty puritanism. Following the rules, I thought, the left always said was going to make us save Granny's life, right? Unless, of course, Granny's white, in which case she could die. But I thought that that was the case. So really, you're going to say that your inability just to bang whoever you want, whenever you want, that is the puritanism that has come about because of the pandemic? That's the true evil of it? When people have lost their jobs, they've lost their livelihoods, they've lost their businesses, they've lost family members. Did you know that suicides are actually going through the roof? Because teenagers and young people, especially elderly people too, the isolation is actually getting to them, and so they are actually killing themselves. But Megan Nolan wants to say that her inability to screw any guy who is actually still alive, that's the big thing. And she even makes mention of this. She continues, the complaints of a single person don't begrudge or contradict the pain of the harangued parent or the anguished daughter missing her sick father. Our struggles are not undermined if society also concedes that there are people who once got substantial meaning from interacting in ways that are now impossible through dating or casual sex. Most of society does not really believe that casual, non-monogamous encounters can actually hold meaning, rather than simply serve as crude ways to blow off steam. I know that they can. Living as a purposefully single and promiscuous person was one way to know others, one way to find joy in the world, and it's gone now. Full pause again. There used to be a word for people like Megan Nolan, and that's slut. I'm just gonna say it right out here in the open, that you're a slut if you think that if you firmly believe that your source of joy, of your source of experiencing the world, or one of the prominent ways of experiencing the world and meeting new people is by banging them, doing the old devil's tango, making the beast with two backs, whatever you want to call it. If that's it, then you're a slut. It's even worse than that. I keep throwing that word around a lot, but that really gets to the core of what it is. She can say whatever that she wants. Oh, well, it's society's fault that people think that way. No, that is actually what you are. And I'm going to build on that after another quote. Okay? Another few paragraphs here from Megan Nolan. A friend asked me a few months ago whether I didn't perhaps regret having ended a long-term relationship in early 2020. At such a particularly bad time in history to choose to be alone. I won't pretend that it didn't cross my mind, that life would have most likely been far more pleasant if I had been with my ex during the worst of the lockdown. Not only would it have been good to have company in general, but I also missed him. Specifically, I loved him. I still love him, which does not mean that it made me happy to be in our relationship. I left because I identified that my desires and needs were not being best served by monogamy. Now I need differently. I need very little from individuals, but I am greedy for the world, and why not? Why shouldn't I be? It's a reasonable and good-natured greed, one fueled not by desperation, but by a tremendous love of the world and the people in it. How could I be ashamed of that? That this impulse was thwarted in 2020 does not make it a malign one. That is the damnable line. Because for all of her talk that, oh, this is just about love, this is about me wanting to experience the world. No. You lying. I'd say something right about now, but it would only be censored. The idea that using people as a means to an end, in this case specifically, using people simply for sexual pleasure, is one of the lowest common denominators that you can put other people and into which you can put yourself as well. Because you have basically, when you say that you just want to bang people because you're greedy for the world, what you're saying is that everyone around you are simply walking packages of meat. You're a meat puppet. Some a little bit more attractive than others. And they exist purely to satisfy your desires. However they come, or however they manifest themselves whenever you want. That's the only thing that other people exist for. So it's actually worse than being an animal. Because some animals are much better at monogamy than people like Megan Nolan, who isn't even attempting. She's decided, hey, you know what? I can totally justify sleeping around, and I'm going to do it to ease my own dirty conscience. Animal like bald eagles, wolves, swans, even. They mate for life. I believe cardinals might mate for life too. Not sure on that one. I know definitely that bald eagles, swans, and wolves mate for life. What this is even worse than being an animal, because this is being lower than an animal, specifically because this contradicts our reason. Immanuel Kant, who is a 18th century German philosopher, one of the great philosophical minds in history. I disagree with a substantial part of his philosophy. His metaphysics is really kind of wonky, but he did say some true things. And one of the things he said, one of the things that he is most famous for, and of course he put it much more precisely, much more philosophically, which means that he probably took 2 pages to write this. But it's one of the things that he is known for, even in general audiences, whether they are familiar with philosophy and philosophers or not. It's that people must be treated as ends to themselves and not means to an end. And that's because each person has intrinsic dignity to himself. And this dignity is rooted in the fact for Kant that we are rational animals, that we have reason, because our reason separates us from the other animals. That's why we can actually have communion with each other, because we recognize that we're not just meat puppets. We recognize in someone else our own selves, what classical thinkers would call the imago Dei. Again, the image of God seared into our very being, which is what allows us to think, to reason, to imagine, to create. We recognize that in every person we meet, or at least we should. That's why he said people must be treated as ends and not simply as means. Because when you treat them as means, then they're just cogs in your machinations, and you disrespect and degrade human nature and the human person and mankind itself through these actions. And that is true for whatever your goal is in treating people as means to an end. It doesn't matter if you're trying to cure cancer and you treat your workers and your scientists and your researchers just as drones in an anthill because, oh my God, we've got to save people. You can't treat people as drones, even if you're trying to find the cure for cancer. because you are disrespecting human nature. You can exert people to work harder, you can encourage them, you can fan the flames of their desire, you can, push them, but the moment you start using them as simply cogs in the machine to achieve this goal, that is when you have crossed the philosophical and the moral line. So if even that is wrong, even using people as means to an end for something which is genuinely noble, like curing cancer, what can we say when we use people as means to an end simply to get our jollies off? What can we actually say about that except to say, again, that people who think like this are sluts? And a whole host of other bad words. Now, reading the comments under this piece, it was, mind-boggling how many people actually agreed with Megan Nolan here on this point. Which brings about the observation, gang, that human nature, it's a curse. Like I said, we can create, we can imagine, we can create wonderful things. But at the same time, there is this very prominent strain in us that is very comfortable with just going to the lowest common denominator and just staying there. Especially when it comes to our own personal creature comforts. And that idea, that thought, is becoming more and more and more prominent, especially as everything around us collapses. Our institutions, what is left of traditional religion, what is left of moral and ethics, what is left of our understanding of what right and wrong is, more and more and more people are going to be acting like this. It's a very reasonable thought, actually. If there is no meaning to life, if there is nothing beyond this life, if there is no truth, if there is no God, if basically we all make our own truth, if we're all just really animals, just bipedal animals, then why not act like this? That's what's happening. And that's why this idea, as everything collapses around us, this idea is becoming more and more and more prominent. And unfortunately, this sort of thing can't be defeated by politics. It has to be defeated within the heart and within the imagination. And it has to be defeated because as long as ideas like this can be printed in supposedly reputable organs like the New York Times, and they are applauded by the elites and all the people who have the cultural power in our society, we're not even going to be able, paradoxically, to have a society because a society requires a communion. Remember, civilization is a means of communication, as Roger Scruton said, of looking people in the eye and being able to understand them and having them understand us. You can't do that with just a collection of walking meat packages. That is story number 2.